No one at Redwood Creek had ever seen a rescue like this. In the middle of a raging storm, Dr. Ava Chen sat alone on the ICU floor, clutching a newborn Bobcat kitten against her heart. The kitten was barely alive, ice cold, breath fading, every medical method failing fast. With nothing left to try, Ava broke every rule in the book. She pressed the tiny wild creature against her own skin, wrapped him in her jacket, and whispered for him to hold on. For hours, it was just the sound of rain, the faint beat of two hearts, and a hope so fragile it felt impossible. No one expected what happened next. At dawn, the kitten opened his wild amber eyes for the very first time, and a bond was born that would shake the entire sanctuary. What Ava did that night changed not just one life, but everything they thought they knew about wild rescue. If you believe in impossible rescues, drop your city or country in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more true animal stories every week. It was the kind of night that made even the bravest deer hide deep in the forest. Storm clouds pressed low over Redwood Creek, and thunder cracked so hard it rattled the windows of every house in the valley. Inside the modest staff cabin of the Northern California Wildlife Sanctuary, Dr. Ava Chen lay awake, listening to the relentless rain and the low, anxious thrum of her own heart. Ava had only been a resident vet here for 6 months. She was the youngest on staff, barely 30, and still wore the raw edges of someone who'd lost too much too soon. A loyal childhood dog taken by illness, a wound that never really healed. She'd chosen this wild, rain-soaked place for a reason. Out here, every life felt urgent. At 2:27 a.m., her phone shrieked, pulling her out of uneasy dreams. She answered on instinct, already reaching for her jacket. "Ava? It's James from Forest Rescue. We found a bobcat kitten, newborn, maybe 2 days old. He's barely breathing. He was huddled alone near the fire line. Lightning must have scared off the mother. He's ice cold, Doc. We're heading in now. 10 minutes. Ava's mind sharpened. She barked quick instructions, then raced through the rain to the Wildlife Center's ICU. The building was thick with the scent of wet fur, disinfectant, and coffee gone stale. Lightning flickered through the windows, making shadows jump along the corridor. The rescue team burst in, soaked to the bone. In James's hands, a bundle no bigger than a glove, swaddled in a foil blanket. The kitten's fur, matted and patchy, clung to his skeletal frame. His paws were stiff, nose gray, body limp as if only the thread of life kept him here. Ava snapped into motion. The team worked by the sterile glow of ICU lamps, warmed fluids, oxygen, delicate IV lines. They slid the kitten into a high-tech incubator. Still, nothing changed. The numbers on the monitor barely flickered. Mr. Harrison, the sanctuary director, stood by the door, arms folded. His face was granite, every line carved by decades of making hard decisions. "We can't save them all, Dr. Chen," he muttered. "Sometimes nature has to take its course." Ava barely heard him. She pressed 2 fingers to the kitten's ribcage, heartbeat fluttering, weak and arrhythmic. She remembered her own dog's fading warmth, the helplessness she'd felt as a child. Not again. She checked the fluids, increased the oxygen, adjusted the incubator temperature. The kitten's breaths stuttered, then faded almost to nothing. In that moment, the room went silent except for the rain and the low hum of failing machines. Ava closed her eyes. A wild, irrational thought took root. He needs more than machines. He needs to know someone wants him to live. She pulled on gloves, scooped the frail kitten out, and cradled him against her own chest, under her jacket, close to her heart. Mr. Harrison frowned. "That's not protocol, Doctor. He's a wild animal." Ava held the kitten tighter. "Protocols aren't saving him. You know, if this fails, it's on you." "I'll take that." She sat down on the cold linoleum floor, rocking the kitten gently. Outside, wind slammed branches against the windows. She whispered, barely audible, "Hang on, little one. Just a little longer." Time lost all meaning. She felt the faint twitch of paws against her palm. She told herself stories of mountain sunrises, of mothers returning, of warmth and milk and survival. She listened for any sign, a change in breathing, a shiver. Hours blurred. She could hear Mr. Harrison arguing with staff in the hall, voices muted but tense. She imagined the storm outside, fire still smoldering somewhere in the hills, the mother bobcat searching, perhaps, or gone forever. The kitten was so light, Ava could almost forget he was there. But then, a tiny, desperate paw flexed against her wrist. She pressed him closer, feeling the faintest spark of warmth move between them. The rain eased. Dawn crept into the windows, pale and uncertain. For the first time, the kitten gave a tremulous sigh, almost a mewl. Ava held her breath, heart pounding. His wild, amber eyes cracked open, unfocused, searching. They settled on her, and in that split second, Ava felt the room shift. Something invisible but real linked them, as fragile as breath. The door creaked open. Mr. Harrison stood there, silent, watching. Ava didn't look away. She knew she'd crossed a line, not just in her job, but in her own heart. But as the kitten's eyes blinked, then closed again against her heartbeat, she knew she wouldn't have chosen differently. Not for anything. The world outside was still dripping with the remnants of last night's storm. Everything washed clean but eerily quiet. Inside the Wildlife Center, the air was heavy with that hushed uncertainty that hangs over hospital wards at dawn, the kind where every step feels like it might wake a sleeping hope. Ava barely noticed the passage of time. She sat through the hours with the kitten pressed against her chest, his heartbeat a frail thrum under her palm. She barely moved except to adjust his position, keeping his small head nestled under her chin, her jacket zipped tight around them both. The world had shrunk to the soft rise and fall of the kitten's sides and the occasional trembling twitch of his ears. Through the fogged window, the sun crept higher, casting a watery gold light over the room. Every few minutes, Ava checked the kitten's temperature by touch. His body, once so cold it felt like stone, was slowly yielding to her warmth. Each time she thought he'd slipped away, he'd offer the tiniest sigh, a flutter of paws, a faint press of nose into her shirt. She whispered words she barely understood herself, stories of the forest, of surviving storms, of second chances. Once, Mr. Harrison passed by, glancing in with a face as unreadable as old bark. He said nothing. The sanctuary, usually a bustle of noise at sunrise, seemed to be holding its breath. By mid-morning, fatigue pressed in on Ava, a bone-deep exhaustion that made her vision blur. But she refused to rest, afraid her absence, even for a moment, would be the difference between life and loss. The kitten's breaths were still shallow, but steadier now, like a river finding its rhythm after the flood. It was just past 7 when something shifted. The kitten's body jerked with a tiny sneeze, startling Ava so much she almost laughed. His paws flexed, claws unsheathing, and for the first time, his mouth opened in a silent, uncertain cry. He blinked up at Ava, eyes wide and wild and shining. Slowly, gently, she placed a warm bottle to his lips. At first, he only sniffed, his nose twitching with confusion. But then instinct took over. He latched on, suckling hungrily, milk bubbling at the corners of his mouth. Tears pricked Ava's eyes. She let herself smile just for a second, as the tension in her body melted away. It was a small miracle, no less real for being quiet. The kitten, who had been nothing more than a shivering shadow a few hours ago, was alive. Not only alive, but clinging to life with every ounce of stubborn will left in him. Around them, the world began to stir. Nurses returned for morning rounds, their footsteps soft as they peered in. A young volunteer paused in the doorway, mouth falling open at the sight. Ava on the floor, cradling a tiny wild creature like a mother with her newborn. Word spread quickly, and soon the ICU filled with cautious hope. But even as relief swept through the staff, a deeper truth settled in Ava's chest. She could feel it in the way the kitten's eyes tracked her every movement, the way his paws kneaded the fabric of her shirt as he fed. In that instant, a bond was sealed, something raw and wordless, stretching across the line between human and wild. She knew, even then, that this would not be simple. That saving his life might mean blurring the boundary between science and something older, wilder, a kind of love that didn't always make sense on paper. But she couldn't turn away, not now. Not after feeling the fragile strength of his heart beating against hers. When Mr. Harrison returned, he stood in silence for a long while. His eyes flickered over the scene. Ava on the floor, hair a tangled mess, exhaustion written in every line of her face, the kitten asleep at her heart. He didn't offer praise, but neither did he object. "You bought him a little time," he said, voice gruff. "Let's hope you bought him enough." Ava nodded, barely trusting herself to speak. She watched as the kitten slept, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm with her own. And for the first time since the storm began, she allowed herself to believe. Sometimes, warmth was enough to call a life back from the edge. As the morning stretched on, the storm clouds lifted. Sunlight spilled through the windows, illuminating the kitten's fur, soft gold with faint streaks of gray, a promise that wildness still lived beneath the surface. The ICU, once a place of anxious whispers, filled with something like joy. In that moment, Ava knew that nothing about this journey would be easy. But for now, all that mattered was the rise and fall of a tiny chest against her own, a rhythm that echoed, in some secret way, the hope she'd carried since childhood. They named him Finn, a name that somehow suited his spirit. A little wild, stubborn, and full of fight. In the days that followed, Ava became his entire world. She was the steady beat beneath his paws, the warmth that banished nightmares, the quiet voice that soothed his every tremor. Finn would only eat when Ava held the bottle, only sleep if she tucked him under her chin, only play when he felt the brush of her hair as she leaned close. The lines between caretaker and mother, between human and wild, grew fainter with every sunrise. At first, everyone at the sanctuary marveled at Finn's recovery. Each morning brought a new milestone. The first time he batted at Ava's finger, the first tiny yawn that showed needle-sharp teeth, the first wobbly steps across her lap. The ICU, once shadowed with tension, now hummed with quiet hope. Ava logged every detail, careful not to miss a single beat of his fragile journey back to life. But hope, like wildness, is never simple. As Finn grew stronger, his dependence deepened. If Ava left the room, even for a moment, panic would set in. His cries, thin, desperate, impossible to ignore, echoed down the sterile corridors, bringing staff running. When someone else tried to feed him, Finn turned away, claws flashing, heart pounding so hard you could see it in the rise and fall of his ribs. Mr. Harrison noticed. He watched from a distance, arms crossed, brow furrowed. One afternoon, as Finn wailed for Ava from his nest of towels, Harrison cornered her in the hallway. His voice was soft, but the words cut all the same. "You're not raising a house cat, Ava. You're raising a wild animal. If he doesn't learn to stand on his own, he'll never survive out there." Ava didn't answer right away. She knew the rules, knew that wildlife professionals were supposed to keep a careful distance, maintain boundaries, never let emotion cloud judgment. But all she could think about was the tiny life pressed against her heart that stormy night. The weight of responsibility, the impossible tenderness of his trust. Harrison leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. "He needs to learn he's a bobcat, or else you're condemning him to a life in captivity, and that isn't fair to him." Ava felt the old ache in her chest, the memory of her childhood dog, the helplessness, the regret. She'd sworn she'd never let herself care too much again. But Finn had shattered that resolve with every trembling paw, every amber-eyed glance. That night, sleep came in fragments. She watched Finn breathe, listened to his soft, restless murmurs, felt the weight of choices pressing in. Professional duty battled with something deeper, an ache that told her love meant both holding on and letting go. By morning, the tension had spread through the staff. Some whispered that Finn was too attached. Others worried that Ava was risking her career. But whenever she tried to distance herself, Finn's fear would spiral out of control. He'd claw at the cage door, eyes wide, chest heaving, until Ava gathered him close once more. She tried introducing him to other caretakers. Gentle voices, slow movements, the smell of wild grass on their hands. But Finn shrank away from them, burrowing into Ava's side, clinging so tightly it hurt. The days grew long and heavy. Outside, summer began to bake the hills, turning the grass brittle and gold. Inside the ICU, Ava searched for answers. She read every study she could find on orphaned wildcats, called experts at zoos and wildlife centers, scribbled notes late into the night. But no manual, no article, no training could tell her what to do when a life depended on the fragile thread between two worlds. One evening, as the sun slipped below the redwoods, Finn curled in Ava's lap, tiny body pressed tight against her ribs. His breath slowed, his eyes fluttered shut. For a moment, the weight of worry eased. Ava realized, with a bittersweet clarity, that love, real love, wasn't about possession. It was about trust, about giving a wild heart the strength to find its own way, even if it meant risking heartbreak. Outside, coyotes called to one another in the dark, their voices sharp and lonely. Ava listened, wondering if someday Finn's cry would join them, no longer a plea for comfort, but a declaration of belonging to the wild world he was born for. As night settled over the sanctuary, Ava made herself a promise. She would do everything in her power to help Finn remember who he was meant to be, even if it meant letting go of the invisible thread that bound them together. The morning Willow arrived, the sanctuary was heavy with late summer heat and the scent of pine needles after rain. A battered pickup rolled through the gates, stopping outside the main enclosure. In the truck bed, inside a wire kennel, crouched a young bobcat, sleek, golden, older than Finn by a few months. Her ears were notched, eyes sharp and untrusting, a wildness about her that nothing could tame. Ava watched from a distance as Staff coaxed Willow out, her muscles tensed like a coiled spring. Unlike Finn, who had entered the world orphaned and near death, Willow carried the fierce memory of her own mother's end. A poacher's trap set just beyond the forest line. The scars on her paws told stories of pain and survival. She trusted no one. Mr. Harrison found Ava in the hallway, a folder tucked under his arm. "This is the test," he said, voice low. "If Finn has any chance of learning to be wild, it's with her. Willow's instincts are pure. She'll show him how to survive, or she'll prove he can't." Ava braced herself, nerves jangling. The stakes felt impossibly high. She set up the meeting in the main rehab enclosure, an open space with logs and brush, shaded by old redwoods. Staff ringed the area, tense, radios ready. She carried Finn into the enclosure, feeling the tremor of his heart through her hands. Willow, released from her crate, paced the perimeter, never taking her eyes off the newcomers. Her tail twitched, every muscle poised for confrontation. Ava knelt and set Finn down gently. He hesitated, looking back at her, searching her face for reassurance. Willow crept closer, the fur along her spine bristling. The air crackled with a tension as old as the forest itself. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Willow hissed, a sound raw and electric, lunging forward with claws outstretched. Finn bolted, scrambling behind Ava, pressing so hard against her leg she felt his claws through her jeans. He buried his face in her ankle, whimpering, his whole body trembling. Ava froze, torn between instinct to protect and the knowledge that every time she shielded Finn, she kept him further from the wild. Willow circled, hackles high, eyes narrowed in warning. "Mr. Harrison's voice sounded over the radio, tight with disappointment. "That's enough! Separate them!" Ava scooped Finn up, his tiny heart racing against her chest. She glanced at Willow, whose gaze never softened. In that moment, the hope she'd carried, that wildness could be taught, that love alone might be enough, flickered, threatened by the reality of instincts and fear. Later in the staff kitchen, Mr. Harrison was blunt. "You see it now, don't you? He's too imprinted. He'll never be wild. You have to start thinking about long-term captivity, maybe education work. But he won't make it out there." Ava felt the sting of failure, a heavy ache in her chest. She replayed the scene in her mind. The flash of Willow's teeth, Finn's desperate scramble. Was this all her doing? Had love crossed a line and doomed him to a life behind fences? That evening, Finn was quiet, listless. He refused his bottle, paws tucked close, ears flat with shame or confusion. Ava sat with him long after sunset, the room filled with the soft sounds of night. Crickets, distant thunder, Willow's call from the far enclosure, wild and solitary. 1,000 doubts gnawed at Ava as she stroked Finn's fur. Had she been selfish? Was her tenderness a kind of cage, no less confining than bars and locks? She remembered Harrison's words, his warning that every bond could become a boundary. But when she looked into Finn's eyes, she saw not weakness, but a longing to belong, a question only the wild could answer. She made a silent promise, tracing the delicate markings on Finn's face. She would not give up. She would find another way. Because love, real love, wasn't about holding on. It was about believing that even the most fragile heart could still remember how to be wild. Outside, the moon rose over Redwood Creek, washing the sanctuary in silver. Somewhere, Willow prowled the shadows, fierce and alone. And in the quiet of the ICU, Ava and Finn clung to hope. The invisible thread stretched thin, but not yet broken. Ava didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of Finn's pen, knees tucked to her chest, watching the faint rise and fall of his breath. The wild seemed farther away than ever. Willow's angry hisses echoed in her ears, a reminder that belonging could not be forced. Still, Ava refused to surrender to despair. By morning, a plan had begun to take shape, something simple, almost primitive. If Finn couldn't survive a direct encounter with Willow, maybe there was a gentler way to coax out his wildness. She requested use of the old transition enclosure, a space divided by thick glass. On one side, Willow paced in restless circles, her amber eyes never softening. On the other, Finn watched from behind Ava's legs, nose pressed against the barrier, every muscle tense. For days, Ava became the bridge between their worlds. She sat on the floor between the glass, sometimes for hours, bottle-feeding Finn while Willow watched with wary suspicion. She scattered bits of raw meat, letting their scents mingle. Through the transparent wall, the bobcats studied each other, at first with fear, then with a flicker of curiosity. Little by little, the changes came. Willow stopped hissing every time Finn drew near. Finn, emboldened by Ava's presence, pressed his paws against the glass, mimicking Willow's movements. Sometimes, when Finn whimpered in anxiety, Willow would flatten her ears but not retreat. Once, Finn even managed a half-hearted growl, startling them both. Ava spent those days in a haze of cautious hope. She read every signal, the twitch of Willow's tail, the way Finn's back arched when he tried to copy her stalking gait. At night, she scrolled through notes and field guides, searching for anything she might have missed. The staff watched, doubtful but unwilling to intervene. Even Mr. Harrison, though skeptical, kept his distance, waiting to see if this fragile experiment might yield a miracle. After a week, Ava introduced a toy, an old rubber ball with faded stripes. She rolled it between the two enclosures, letting it pick up each cat's scent. Willow batted it with force, leaving claw marks in the plastic. Finn, wide-eyed, mimicked her, pawing at his side of the glass. Something subtle shifted, an energy that hummed between them, neither entirely trust nor fear. The real test came the following morning. Ava placed bowls of fresh meat on each side of the enclosure, sitting quietly in the middle as both cats approached. Willow eyed Finn warily, but focused on her meal. Finn, drawn by hunger and emboldened by routine, crept close, only inches from the barrier. For the first time, he didn't look back at Ava for reassurance. He watched Willow, matching her movements, his small jaws working the food with growing confidence. The next afternoon, when Ava opened the sliding door and removed the glass barrier, her heart hammered with anticipation and dread. For a long moment, neither bobcat moved. The air was thick with old fears and the electric promise of something new. Willow was the first to break the silence. She took a tentative step forward, head low, muscles rippling beneath her coat. Finn shrank back at first, then, gathering his courage, stepped out to meet her. Willow circled, tail flicking, but she didn't hiss. Instead, she sniffed the air around Finn, drawing in his scent, testing the boundaries of this new companionship. There was no fight, only a delicate dance of approach and retreat, curiosity flickering in every glance. Within minutes, Willow darted away, pausing to look back as if issuing a silent challenge. Finn, uncertain but drawn by instinct, followed her. The chase began, first awkward, then joyful, paws thudding softly against the earth. From her place on the ground, Ava watched them, her heart full of relief and an unexpected ache. She had bridged the divide, but she knew the moment wouldn't last. Already the world was shifting. Willow had become the mirror Finn needed, the wild companion his instincts craved. Ava's role was changing, from mother to guide, from anchor to witness. As twilight deepened over the sanctuary, Finn and Willow tumbled in the grass, their bodies a blur of gold and shadow. For the first time, Ava saw not a fragile orphan, but a young bobcat learning to be wild. She pressed her hand to the earth, grounding herself in the bittersweet joy of letting go. In that fading light, Ava realized that true love wasn't about holding on. It was about giving someone the space and the courage to become exactly who they were meant to be. By late July, the sanctuary shimmered under a relentless sun. The hills, once lush and green, faded to brittle gold. Staff whispered about drought, watched the sky for signs of rain that never came. In the afternoons, the scent of dry grass and pine needles seemed to hang heavier than usual, a warning written into the air. The first lightning strike was distant, little more than a blue flash behind the ridgeline. But within hours, the news spread. Wildfire, moving fast, wind-driven and hungry. Some sirens blared up and down Redwood Creek as volunteers scrambled to load crates, herd frightened animals, and move water lines. Ash began to fall, soft as moth wings, settling on every surface. Ava was in the transition enclosure, watching Finn and Willow chase insects in the waning light, when her radio crackled. "Evac order! Everyone to safe zones! Now!" The world tilted. Routine evaporated, replaced by adrenaline and dread. Chaos unfurled in seconds. Staff rushed from pen to pen, swinging open latches, shouting names. Birds wheeled in panicked flocks overhead, and somewhere beyond the perimeter, the sky glowed orange and wrong. Ava scooped up Finn, calling for Willow, who darted away, spooked by the shouting and strange, acrid scent. Finn clawed at Ava's shoulder, twisting to escape. Willow bolted toward the far fence, then vanished through a narrow gap into the dense undergrowth. "No, no, no, Willow!" Ava's voice was lost in the wind. Mr. Harrison ran up, smoke streaked across his face. "We've got to go, Ava. That fire's coming fast." But Finn was writhing, wild with panic, and Willow was gone. Ava's mind flashed with memories of that first stormy night. The helplessness, the urgent need to fight for a single fragile life. She made her decision before fear could argue. She shoved a breathing mask over her face, grabbed the fire-resistant coat from the wall, and ducked under the emergency tape. The sanctuary gates groaned open as vehicles roared out, but Ava ran the other way, toward the smoke, toward the last place she'd seen Willow. Embers whirled in the wind, stinging her cheeks. In the distance, flames crackled through the brush, throwing monstrous shadows on the trees. Heart hammering, she called their names, voice hoarse. "Finn! Willow!" Nothing but the roar of fire and the drumbeat of her own footsteps. She searched the perimeter, shining her flashlight into every hollow, every patch of brush, every hollowed log. At last, a faint cry. a mew, unmistakable somewhere near the old cave at the edge of the property. Ava dropped to her knees, crawling under the thick smoke. Inside the cave, pressed together in a tight, quivering knot, were Finn and Willow, eyes wide, bodies slick with sweat and fear. She reached in, hands shaking. "It's okay. I've got you." Finn recognized her voice, and for a moment, his wildness evaporated. He crawled out, trembling, nuzzling against Ava's glove. Willow hesitated, ears flat, but the sight of Finn moving toward safety was enough. She followed, step by cautious step. A wall of heat pulsed at their backs as they staggered from the cave. Firefighters, faces masked, eyes wide, waved Ava toward the break in the fence. One of them grabbed Finn, bundled him in a wet blanket. Another gently lifted Willow. Ava stumbled after them, lungs burning, vision blurring with relief. Only when they reached the safe zone did Ava let herself collapse to the grass, gasping for breath. Finn was in her arms, Willow beside them, both cats wide-eyed but alive. The world spun with sirens, distant shouting, the hiss of water on fire. In that moment, nothing else mattered. "Mr. Bro." Harrison knelt beside her, face grim. "You're lucky you made it out. That was reckless, Ava." But as Finn curled in her lap, Willow pressed close, and the last embers of the fire faded into the black sky. Ava knew it hadn't been recklessness. It was the bond, the very thing Harrison had doubted, that had brought Finn and Willow back from the edge. She wrapped her arms around them both, smoke and sweat mingling with tears. For all the fear and danger, love had proven stronger, wilder than any fire. The wildfire left a scar across Redwood Creek, a band of charred earth and ash, blackened trees standing like sentinels against the pale dawn. The sanctuary, battered but standing, had survived. No animals were lost. Yet, for days afterward, the place seemed to hold its breath. Smoke lingered in the air, and the usual chorus of birds was replaced by a cautious silence. Ava spent those first mornings walking the perimeter, boots crunching over burnt grass, checking every enclosure, every hiding place. She carried Finn and Willow with her, unwilling to let them out of sight. Both bobcats clung close, their nerves raw from the ordeal, their eyes flickering at every sudden movement. Ava kept them together, letting them heal side by side, a pair forged not just by circumstance, but by survival. As repairs began, staff and volunteers worked shoulder to shoulder, hauling away debris, patching fences, painting over smoke stains. The community sent food and blankets. Children drew pictures of bobcats and firefighters and taped them to the sanctuary gates. The work was hard, but underneath it all was a sense of gratitude, a silent recognition that things could have turned out much worse. One afternoon, while Ava was helping to repair the owl aviary, she noticed Mr. Harrison standing nearby, arms folded, watching her work. For a moment, she expected the old warnings, another round of doubts. But this time, his face was softer, less certain. He cleared his throat. "You did good, Ava. The words seemed to stick. He tried again. "When you're ready, I want you to take charge of the recovery plan. Full authority." It wasn't quite an apology, but in Harrison's world, it was more than enough. Ava felt the weight of those words settle over her. Responsibility, yes, but also trust. She nodded, and for the first time since the fire, allowed herself to hope that maybe her way of loving, of fighting for every life, had a place here after all. Evenings came quietly now. the sky turning gold over the blackened hills. Ava would sit with Finn and Willow in the new grass that poked through the ashes. She watched the bobcats stretch and yawn, playful again, the trauma of the fire fading by degrees. Sometimes Finn would brush against her leg, eyes seeking hers with a gentler trust. Willow, more reserved, would keep her distance, but Ava noticed she no longer flinched when their shadows crossed. One evening, Finn climbed a low branch and watched the sun set. Ava sat beside him, arms wrapped around her knees, and let the silence fill her. She thought about the line she'd walked, between wild and tamed, between holding close and letting go. She understood now that love couldn't save everything, couldn't shield those you cared for from all hurt or danger. But love could build trust, and trust was the ground where wildness could root and grow strong. As the sanctuary settled into its new rhythm, Ava took on her new role with care. She listened to staff concerns, coordinated vet visits, and made decisions that balanced science and compassion. Finn and Willow continued to grow, their bond with each other deepening. They played and sparred, chasing each other through patches of new grass, moving with a confidence that came from knowing they were safe, at least for now. Mr. Harrison, true to his word, stepped back. Sometimes Ava caught him watching from a distance, a quiet pride in his eyes. Other times he offered small suggestions, never orders, on how to improve the habitat, how to make the sanctuary more resilient for the next challenge. Slowly, the rift between tradition and change began to heal. One night, under a sky clear for the first time in weeks, Ava lay awake, listening to Finn's soft purring from his nest in the corner. She realized that the real work wasn't in fighting disaster or defying rules. It was in earning trust, day by day, in both animals and people. And in that trust, there was a freedom stronger than any fence, any fire. As dawn crept back over Redwood Creek, the world felt new, scarred, but not broken. The sanctuary would grow wild again, and so would those who called it home. The sanctuary's rebirth was slow, but steady. With each passing week, patches of green threaded their way through the burn scars, wildflowers blooming defiantly in the ash. The hum of construction faded, replaced by the rustle of new leaves, the cautious return of birdsong, and the soft pad of bobcat paws over unfamiliar ground. Ava watched the transformation with a bittersweet pride. She poured herself into the new design for the bobcat enclosure, a sprawling, semi-wild landscape of brush, rock piles, and felled logs that mimicked the edges of the deep forest. Fences were hidden behind climbing vines and thick willow stands. Shallow creeks meandered through the grass, glinting in the sun. Everything about the space whispered of freedom, while still protecting those not yet ready for the full wild. Finn and Willow thrived in this new world. Willow claimed the highest boulders, lounging in the sun, eyes half closed, tail twitching. Finn explored every corner, nose to the ground, climbing, leaping, sometimes chasing invisible prey across the clearing. Together, they were a blur of gold and shadow, two young bobcats, no longer orphans, but a bonded pair, forged by loss and healed by wildness. Ava spent hours observing them from the blind, scribbling notes, adjusting enrichment, tracking every milestone. The staff, old hands and new volunteers alike, marveled at how Finn had changed. His movements were confident, his eyes clear. Even Willow, once distrustful and skittish, now greeted him with playful pounces and rare, gentle headbutts. But the closer Finn came to the wildness he was born for, the more Ava felt the ache of parting grow inside her. She caught herself lingering by the enclosure long after the sun had set, her fingers curled around the fence, watching Finn disappear into the thick grass with Willow at his side. Some nights, she dreamed of that first storm, of the helpless kitten pressed against her chest, clinging to life. She remembered every trembling heartbeat, every uncertain dawn. The decision to let go was never spoken aloud. It lived in the small things, the way Finn glanced less often toward the human blind, the way Willow greeted new sounds without fear. It lived in the way Finn returned to Ava's side only occasionally now, as if checking in before leaping back into the world he was learning to call his own. Mr. Harrison noticed. One afternoon, as they repaired a stretch of fence, he glanced over at Ava. "He's ready, you know. You did your job." Ava swallowed, the words catching in her throat. She knew he was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. She spent the evening with Finn and Willow, watching them hunt insects, tumble in the grass, disappear and reappear in the brush. She tried to memorize the way the light played on Finn's fur, the sound of his low hiss, rumbling purr when he paused to rest beside her. Pride and heartbreak mingled, sharp and inescapable. Ava had always known this moment would come, the day her role would shift from rescuer to witness, from protector to memory. She wanted to believe that love was enough, but now she understood it was trust. The trust to let go, to believe that what she'd given would last beyond her reach. The next morning, under a sky washed clean by rain, Ava prepared for the transition. She gathered Finn's old toys, the blanket from his first night, a favorite stick he'd carried everywhere as a kitten. She lined the new enclosure with familiar scents, then opened the gate, heart pounding. Finn hesitated only a second, then slipped into the wild grass, Willow close behind. For a moment, they paused, two shadows at the edge of a new beginning. Finn looked back, just once, his amber eyes meeting Ava's. In them she saw everything they'd shared, fear, hope, survival, love, and something more, readiness. Ava pressed her hand to the fence, her goodbye silent but full. The enclosure wasn't true wilderness, but it was a step, a chance. She watched as Finn and Willow vanished into the tall grass, swallowed by the wild that had called them all along. In the stillness that followed, Ava felt the ache of parting, pride, sorrow, relief, all tangled together. She had done what she came here to do. She had loved a wild thing enough to let it go. The morning of release dawned soft and gray, with mist hanging low over the sanctuary meadows. Ava moved quietly through her routine, gathering the last few things: a pair of leather gloves, Finn's well-worn blanket, the clipboard with her final notes. Her hands shook just a little as she packed them away. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighted by the knowledge that after today, everything would change. Finn and Willow were waiting by the gate, their bodies relaxed but alert, as if sensing that something different hovered in the air. Finn's eyes, so familiar and wild, followed Ava as she approached. Willow paced, her tail flicking, curiosity and anticipation pulsing through every movement. Ava knelt beside them, smoothing the fur along Finn's back, feeling the wiry strength he'd grown into. "Ready, buddy?" she whispered, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Finn pressed his head into her palm, one brief instinctive gesture, a language older than words. Ava closed her eyes and let the moment linger, willing herself to memorize the warmth, the weight, the silent trust. With gentle hands, she slipped the gate open, Beyond, the new semi-wild reserve spread out in rolling hills and tangled forest. Streams cutting through grass, fallen logs dappled with sun, shadows deep and promising. It was as close to true freedom as Finn would know, at least for now. She walked beside them, her boots brushing dew from the grass, heart pounding with each step. Willow surged ahead, nose twitching, already testing the boundaries of her new world. Finn stayed close, glancing between Ava and the open field, uncertain for a heartbeat. Then, as the breeze shifted, carrying the wild scents of pine and earth, something changed. He stepped forward, muscles rippling beneath his coat, each movement filled with a new confidence. At the edge of the trees, Ava paused. She crouched, meeting Finn's eyes for what she knew might be the last time up close. The world felt utterly still, just the hush of wind and the quiet thud of her own heart. Finn pressed his forehead into her hand once more, then turned to Willow, their bodies brushing as they slipped into the thicket together. Ava remained kneeling, the grass damp beneath her, watching as the two bobcats melted into shadow. For a moment, Finn glanced back, a single look, full of gratitude, memory, and something that felt like goodbye. It wasn't longing, it wasn't regret, it was simply acceptance, the courage to claim a life of his own. Tears blurred Ava's vision, but she let them come. Tears not of loss, but of fulfillment. She thought of the kitten shivering against her chest that first night, of all the nights spent awake, all the decisions, doubts, and hope that had led to this point. She thought of the line between wild and tamed, and how love, when it's real, means letting go. She stayed until the sun burned through the mist, until the only sign of Finn and Willow were paw prints in the soft mud, already fading. Slowly, she stood, brushing grass from her knees. The world felt both emptier and larger than before. A space cleared, not by absence but by possibility. As Ava walked back through the sanctuary, staff offered her quiet smiles, nods of understanding. Mr. Harrison met her at the gate, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. Sometimes the greatest kindness is silence. That evening, Ava returned to the fence line, watching the trees sway in the dusk. Somewhere, hidden by branches and distance, Finn and Willow were making their way, learning, testing, growing bolder with each step. The ache in her chest was sharp, but beneath it ran a deep current of peace. She had given everything she could, and in return, received the kind of love that endures beyond sight or touch. For the rest of the night, she left the gate ajar, just in case Finn came back to say one more goodbye. But as darkness settled over Redwood Creek, she understood. Sometimes the truest farewells are the quietest, a silent promise that what you've given lives on, wild and free. Years passed, as gently as the seasons shifting through Redwood Creek. The fire scars faded, new saplings climbed skyward, and the sanctuary thrived under fresh leadership and a new vision. Dr. Ava Chen, once the youngest and most restless on staff, now stood at the heart of it all. She'd taken up Mr. Harrison's old office, though the door was always open and sunlight pooled on the floor, carrying the wildness in with every breeze. Ava had made a promise to herself, and to Finn, long ago. She kept it by changing the way the sanctuary worked, not just with science and protocols, but with empathy and patience. The Finn method, they started calling it, a balance of research and the kind of intuitive care that had once brought a dying kitten back from the edge. Across the country, Other centers reached out for her advice. She lectured to students and wrote articles, always returning to one simple idea. True healing required both knowledge and a kind of gentle trust. The Bobcat enclosure had expanded over the years. It now sprawled into a wild, semi-open reserve, alive with the rush of water, the shimmer of grass in the wind, the soft tracks of hidden paws. Sometimes, if you waited long enough in the quiet, you might glimpse a flash of gold in the shadows, a bobcat moving with effortless confidence, vanishing before you could be sure what you saw. Ava often climbed the observation deck at dusk, binoculars in hand, her notebook pressed to her chest. From that vantage, she tracked the movements of the bobcats she'd once nursed as orphans. Willow grew sleek and powerful, mothering her own litter one spring, a sign that the wounds of her past had finally healed. But it was Finn Ava searched for most, scanning the tree line, searching for the familiar set of his shoulders, the amber glint of his eyes. One evening, as the sun burned low over the hills, she saw him. Finn, no longer a cub, but a formidable adult, leading a pair of yearlings through the tall grass. His stride was sure, every muscle speaking of strength and purpose. He paused at the edge of the stream, lifting his head to the wind. For a heartbeat, Ava could have sworn he glanced her way. Her breath caught, and she let herself believe that somewhere inside he remembered. The warmth, the safety, the impossible love that had shaped his very first days. Finn melted into the trees, leaving only the whisper of grass and the echo of his presence. Ava felt no ache of loss. What remained was a kind of peace, deep and unshakable. She had given Finn a beginning, but his story had become his own. The wild had claimed him, as it was always meant to do. Back at her desk, Ava kept a photograph by the window, a faded image of herself, younger and exhausted, holding a tiny, trembling kitten against her heart. Visitors often paused to look at it, drawn by the tenderness captured in that single moment. Ava would smile and tell them, "That's Finn. He taught me more about courage and letting go than any textbook ever could." The Finn method became more than a practice. It was a philosophy, shaping every rescue, every rehabilitation. New staff learned that boundaries could save lives, but so could compassion. Ava encouraged them to listen, to the animals, to each other, to the wildness that lived in every heartbeat. Years later, children would visit the sanctuary and listen to stories beneath the old willow trees. They'd hear about the night a storm brought a dying kitten to Ava's door, about the fire that threatened everything, about the quiet bravery of loving something enough to let it go. They'd watch for bobcats in the tall grass, their imaginations running wild, their eyes bright with hope. As the sun set each evening, Ava would walk the fence line, letting the quiet settle around her. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of movement in the twilight. Finn, or one of his kin, slipping silently through the brush. She no longer needed to hold him close. His legacy lived everywhere, in the sanctuary, in the people and animals who found healing there, in the lesson that love, real love, can cross any boundary if you're brave enough to trust. And as darkness gathered, Ava smiled, knowing that the bond she shared with Finn would never fade. It lived on, not in possession, but in freedom, the wild, untamable gift they'd given each other.